Ready?
Yeah, Pearl.
Okay. How does artificial aquifer recharge work?
Well, anytime humans are putting water into the ground intentionally or unintentionally, that's artificial recharge. Natural recharge being that comes from precipitation, rain or snow, and then leakage from streams and surface water bodies into the ground. So artificial recharge, people are doing it all over the country now, whether it's injecting water into deep wells or using infiltration basins and using ponded water to get it into the ground, or in the case of the pilot study, we used abandoned irrigation ditches. So those very effectively have let water into the ground, and it was inadvertent in the case of the irrigators over the course of the 100 years, but now they're conserving water and not needing to divert as much by keeping the water in pipes instead. So is that enough of an answer?
I think so, just to give people a visual of, how this actually physically works.
Right. Well, you can use gravity to attain it, or you can pump it into the ground. Like I said, people are actually using reverse pumps to pump water into the ground. So at different levels.
And that's in other places, or is that in Dungeness?
Yeah, we haven't done that here. That was one of the scenarios that we looked at in the overall study on aquifer recharge feasibility that we did with an ecology grant. The county managed this grant, and this is the final report, and they evaluated really closely 3 different scenarios, one being the ditch recharge, one being infiltration basins using reclaimed water that the city of Soule produces, and then one being a injection well, and then recovering that water through a regular pumping well, downgrading it from that.
Okay. And how do you measure the effects of water that you recharged into the ground?
Well, that was a good lesson that we learned in the pilot study, was that it's actually very difficult to measure the effects if you're anywhere near something else that's recharging. We were only a mile away from the Dungeness River, which puts dozens of cubic feet per second into the ground continuously throughout the year, but particularly at the time of snowmelt, when the river level rises very quickly. It really recharges the whole area around it a lot because that river level is rising, and so the water table comes up. Well, we were close enough to that it affected our ability to see the trace of our actions because they were so small in comparison to how much water was coming in the ground over there. So you do need very sophisticated methods to pick apart your data. If you've got wells that you can monitor, the ideal thing would be to have very shallow monitoring wells, and then very sophisticated instruments in the stream too, to try and measure fluctuations in stream flow, which is quite difficult, I think.
And what do you think are the most significant findings of this pilot project?
The pilot project was significant in that we were very, well, I'm going to have to start over because I haven't even thought about that. Let's see. The significant,
or, kind of the idea of what does it mean for the future? How might it be used? What's most useful or significant about the pilot project going into the future?
I have a good answer for that.
Okay. So what's most significant or useful about this pilot project going into the future?
Well, the overall aquifer recharge study concluded that aquifer recharge, artificial recharge, is a very viable tool and a feasible tool. It is expensive. They did all the costing out after they did the modeling of those 3 different scenarios. They costed all of them out, and so it would the cost benefit would be great. However, it does provide, in some cases, the only option for trying to get water into streams, wet water, back into streams to supplement the stream flow.
Okay.
You sounded great, Anne. I didn't hear any in your voice. It didn't sound any different than your normal speaking. But.
Okay. Are you ready to? Do you want to take a break before we go to the other question? Or?
Yeah, I need to get.
Am I where you want?
Yeah. Okay.
The local leaders group is making recommendations on how water projects should be prioritized in the Dungeness watershed. What projects are on the top of your list and why?
Yeah, the local leaders work group has come together incredibly effectively this past year, and one of the things that they agreed to do as they got together and kind of agreed to cooperate in seeing that there is this concept of mitigation and a new way of managing water, a new way of doing business, which involves mitigation coming. The question is, how are you going to do it? You know, what are you going to mitigate with? When? Where? And so those were the key questions that one of the main things that the group agreed to focus on. And so their recommendations came about for mitigation after quite a process of evaluation with the consultants, Washington Water Trust and Ecosystem Economics, some folks that were consulting with us to help us prioritize and set up criteria for how would you pick what projects are going to work for different things. So as far as mitigation goes, you're going to need to mitigate in the Dungeness River, and then also small streams, which are completely different beasts to try and resolve the low flow in each of those things. So what we did was we have this table that we ended up with that goes through, you know, what projects did rise to the top for Dungeness River mitigation, small stream mitigation, et cetera. So for the river, by far the most cost-effective and simplest thing to do would be to try and minimize the amount of water diverted from the river in the first place. So the ability for the irrigators to sell water rights frees up wet water for mitigation. And so that is, again, as far as mitigating the Dungeness River, that's going to be the most effective way. And that rose to the top for that, as long as the irrigators have water rights to sell, and they do. So, and small streams are a much trickier thing because there aren't a lot of water rights on them in the first place that might be available to sell back. But yeah, they're just, you know, finding water to put in the small streams is very tricky. So whether or not we could use off recharge is high on the list on that one. And then also perhaps taking wells that are near the smaller streams and mitigating their impacts by deepening them or transferring those wells to a different water source. So those are options. None of them are easy, but those are the best options for mitigation. And then the local leaders were also very interested in restoration, and that was another one of their goals, was to make sure we're not forgetting about the need to actually restore flow. So mitigation being, you know, reducing the impact of or eliminating the impact of future water use, but restoration actually restoring flow. So in that case, we ended up with a couple high priorities. One being source changes, whether we could in the late season switch from water that's being taken from the river for use by irrigators, outdoor use, from that to well use. So especially in the case of some of the surface water users that are on ends of the system, if they could switch to a groundwater use in the late season, then it's much more expensive to use groundwater because of the pumping. But if they can switch in the late season, it might be worth it to keep more water in the river and reduce the diversion. So that's one of the big options for restoration. Of course, the irrigators are constantly improving their efficiency, so that's another thing that's ongoing. And then another major, there's a lot of hope in the area of doing some small reservoirs that are off stream, not in the channel, but off the channel, small reservoirs that could be used for storage of irrigation water and or recharge that would then supplement small streams.
So the ones that are on the top of the list, is that because they're the most doable, most cost-effective? How do
Right. Mostly because they're the most doable and somewhat cost-effective. The ability to achieve something ranked as a high criteria compared to just whether or not it was going to solve a problem. So if we thought we had willing landowners or cooperators or potential funding sources, then that kind of popped things up to higher ranking.
And I think we should explain, define mitigation.
Well, so mitigating for anything is reducing the impacts of that action. So if in the case of mitigation in water management here in the Dungeness, and I think all across Washington State and probably the West, the need for mitigating, lessening, and reducing the impacts of development and human activities on the natural system is where things are headed in terms of management. So how you do that, again, is wide open. You could, well, we've talked about aquifer recharge is one way to put water into the ground and try and achieve that it will come out in the stream and increase the stream flow down the road. And other activities involve using well water and deepening wells and using deeper wells rather than shallower wells, because deeper wells have a less impact as well.
And water right transfers, or water right,
Take these.
bring up water rights so that landowners can use,
Oh, freeing up water rights.
or,
Are you asking how that mitigates?
Yeah, just, because you were talking earlier about the, the irrigators and those with the senior water rights, putting back in so that the newer people can use